All right, let's dive into a really fascinating take on a chapter from the Quran, Surah At-Tur. It all starts with this powerful idea. Our mind's greatest purpose is, well, to think.
So the thinking is just memorizing stuff? That weakens the mind. But real questioning? That builds it up.
And this leads to a pretty big idea. We're here to witness, not just to own things. But what does witness even mean? It's about really seeing the world and answering to your conscience.
The speaker argues the text isn't making an oath. Instead, it's calling the world to testify.
First up, the mountain is called to bear witness to all of creation.
Then it's the written scroll's turn, and that means any text, even the book of nature.
Next, the inhabited house, which you could see as our world, or maybe the whole universe.
The raised sky, the atmosphere all around us, is also called to testify.
And finally, the sea. It's also summoned to witness the grand design of it all.
So what's the point? It's all about the physical world, the stuff we can actually see and study.
Now, this idea of seeking truth on a mountain, it has some serious historical weight.
Think about it. Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, even Nietzsche, they all went to the mountains seeking wisdom.
But what happens when that spirit of inquiry gets replaced by just blind dogma? Well, it's dangerous. He points to a huge contradiction. The Quran says the prophet didn't know the future, but other texts claim he knew everything. And look, this isn't just some abstract debate. It has real life or death consequences. He tells this tragic story of a family who refused help for a woman in labor because of dogma. Both she and the baby died. It's a brutal example of the human cost when belief trumps reason and compassion. So the path forward isn't about having all the answers. It's about being in the search itself. And this is perfectly symbolized by the prophet's cave, Hira. The name itself literally means to seek. Because true faith isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a constant, never-ending search for understanding. Which leaves us with one last big question. What's the real cost of believing you've already arrived? Today, we're digging into a really fascinating interpretation of an ancient text, the Quran's Surah At-Tur. And this isn't just about history. It's an argument that this text is actually a call for something incredibly modern, a call to reason, to observe, and to think for ourselves. So let's just jump right in with the core idea, which starts with the most amazing tool we have, our mind. The whole argument here is that the reason we have a brain isn't just to soak up information like a sponge. Its purpose is to get in there, to engage, to ask questions, and to reason its way through the world. And this really gets to the heart of it. Think about it. On one hand, you've got rote memorization. Our source says this is like putting your brain on autopilot. It actually uses less energy. But on the other hand, you have active reasoning. That's the real workout. And the argument is that the best way to show gratitude for the gift of a mind is to actually use it for what it was made for, to think. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what it means to be grateful for our mind. Then we'll get into the main theme, this idea of being a witness. After that, we'll unpack the key symbols in the text, look at the difference between what we can see and what we can't, and wrap it all up with what it means for us personally. So, let's kick things off with this foundational idea. How do we truly honor the incredible gift of consciousness? The concept here is called shukr, which we translate as gratitude. But it's not just about saying thank you. It's way deeper than that. It's functional. It's like this. If someone gives you a professional camera, the best way to thank them isn't just with words, right? It's by going out and taking amazing photos. Well, the same thing applies to our brain. The real thanks is using it to reason, to question, to make connections, not just letting it run on empty. And if we take that idea of functional gratitude, it leads us to something huge, a completely different way of looking at why we're even here. This right here is the central pillar of the whole argument. Our job here isn't to own things, to conquer, to possess. Our role is to observe, to understand, to bear testimony. We are here to be witnesses. So where does this radical idea come from? It's all in a subtle but totally game-changing rereading of the very first verse. Most translations say something like, by the mount, as in a divine oath. But this interpretation points out that the Arabic can also mean something else entirely. Let the mount be a witness. And with that tiny shift, everything changes. It's no longer a passive oath. It's an active command, a directive to us to look at the world around us.
So if we're supposed to be witnesses, what are we supposed to be looking at? Well, the text lays out a very specific list. And these aren't just random objects. Each one is a clue pointing to something much bigger. First up, the Tur, or the mountain. Think about it. In so many traditions, where do people go when they're searching for truth or a higher calling? They climb a mountain. It's this perfect universal symbol for that hard, upward journey for knowledge. It's no surprise that figures like Moses, Jesus, and the Prophet Muhammad all had these profound mountaintop experiences. Next, we're told to witness the inscribed book. Now, your first thought might be, okay, a holy book, like the Quran. But this interpretation suggests something way bigger. It's talking about the universe itself as a book, the book of existence. The laws of physics are its chapters, the story of geology is written on its pages, and the code of life is its alphabet. It's telling us to read that book. Then we have the unfurled parchment. This points directly at us, at our story. It represents all of the recorded knowledge we've ever gathered, the entire history of human thought and discovery, preserved on physical media for all of us to see. And you know, the history of writing is really a history of power. Check this out. Ancient Egypt had a monopoly on papyrus, which means they controlled the flow of information. So what did their rivals do? The city of Pergamon invented parchment just to get around it. Then, centuries later, paper technology from China completely changes the game again. The medium is always changing, but that struggle to record and control knowledge is timeless.
The frequented house is another amazing symbol. The idea is that a place only becomes meaningful, much more, because of the life inside it. An empty house is just a shell, right? But when a family moves in, it becomes a home. The same logic applies to our whole planet. It's not just a rock floating in space. It's frequented. It's made meaningful by all the life that calls it home.
And to round it all out, the text points to two more huge observable things: the raised ceiling, our sky, the atmosphere, and the swelling sea, our oceans. So you've got mountains, books, houses, the sky, the sea. They're all tangible, physical parts of our world that we're being called on to witness. And this is where all these different symbols finally click into place and point toward one single massive idea.
So what's the point of all this? Why would a spiritual text be so focused on mountains, oceans, and the sky? Well, according to this interpretation, the answer lies in a really crucial distinction.
You have to understand that there are two different realms of knowledge. Think of it like two different toolboxes. First, there's the Shahadat Alami, which is the observable physical world. For that toolbox, you use science, reason, observation. Then you have the Gaib Alami, the unseen world of faith, concepts like God, the afterlife, and for that toolbox, you use faith and revelation. The whole point is that you don't mix up your tools. You wouldn't use a telescope to find God, and you wouldn't use faith to calculate gravity.
So the big takeaway is this. By pointing to the material world, the Quran is giving a massive thumbs up to the tools you need to understand it. It's a powerful call for scientific inquiry, for using our reason to figure out the universe, and it's a firm rejection of trying to explain observable reality with things like superstition or guesswork. Okay, that's the grand philosophy of it all. But how does this connect back to our day-to-day lives? Let's bring it all home. The surah has this absolutely profound line. Just think about that for a second. What does it mean to be a hostage to your own actions? It means that the things we do are choices. They ultimately define and constrain us. We're not captured by some outside force. We're captured by the sum total of our own lives.
And this is what connects everything back together. If we came here to be witnesses, then our actions are our testimony. Our entire life becomes the witness statement that we give. It's not about what we say we believe. It's about the cold, hard evidence of how we actually lived.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The text calls on us to go out and read the book of existence. But with every choice we make, we're also writing our own chapter in that book. So the question to ask yourself is this: are you being a true witness, not just to the world around you, but to the story you yourself are creating?
Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today. Usually, when we pick up a source that looks like a theological text, we expect a very specific kind of conversation. You know, the drill abstract concepts, maybe some moralizing, a bit of ancient grammar.
Sure, yeah, the usual stuff.
But the stack of research we have in front of us today It's completely, totally different.
It really is. It's a curveball.
It's a massive curveball. So we're looking at a lecture by Mustafa Islamalu, and yes, on the surface, it is an analysis of a specific chapter of the Quran, Surah At-Tur, or the chapter of the mountain.
Right.
But if I didn't tell you that up front and we just started reading through the transcript, you might think we were looking at a lecture on, I don't know, evolutionary biology.
Or the history of paper manufacturing.
Or the history of paper.
Or a critique of the Athenian legal system during the trial of Socrates.
It's a sprawling, multidisciplinary journey. It really is. The source material uses this ancient text as a jumping-off point to talk about, well, the entire history of human knowledge. It's a masterclass in critical thinking, disguised as a sermon.
That's a great way to put it.
And it starts with a hook that I think applies to literally everyone listening, regardless of what they believe or don't believe. It starts with the concept of gratitude. Now, when I say gratitude, my mind immediately goes to, like, a gratitude journal. Or I think of saying thank you when someone holds the door for me. It's a polite, verbal acknowledgement.
Right. That's the social definition we all work with. But the source material comes in hot with a completely functional definition. It argues that gratitude isn't what you say.
It's what you do.
It's how you use something.
Okay, let's unpack that, because that just flips the script immediately. The definition he gives is, gratitude for a blessing is using that blessing for its created purpose.
Exactly. Think of it like a tool. If I give you a high-precision telescope and you use it to look at the stars, you are showing gratitude for the telescope. You are honoring its design.
You're using it for what it was made for.
But if you use that same telescope as, say, a doorstop.
Or a coat rack. Yeah.
Or a coat rack, you might say, thank you for the telescope every single day. You could polish it and write poems about it. But functionally, you are being ungrateful.
You are denying the purpose of the object.
You're denying its purpose. And the source uses a really specific word for this. He calls this kuf, which is usually translated as, infidelity or unbelief.
Right.
But the literal root of the word means to cover up or to deny. You're covering up the tool's potential. You're denying what it's for.
So, okay, the lecture takes this very mechanical, functional definition of gratitude and immediately applies it to the one tool we all have.
The human brain.
The human brain. And this is where we get into the neuroscience right at the top of the discussion, because if the brain is a tool, a piece of equipment, then what is it designed for?
The source argues, very forcefully, that the brain is designed to reason. It's designed to question, to ask why and how, to engage in self-criticism. That is the fundamental function of the hardware between your ears.
So if you were just coasting, if you were just accepting everything you hear without filtering it, or if you're just memorizing facts without actually understanding them,
right,
you aren't just being, like, intellectually lazy.
No.
You are, by this definition, committing an act of ingratitude against your own biology.
You are misusing the equipment. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And the source actually dives into the neurobiology of this. He talks about how these activities, questioning, analyzing, really struggling with a complex idea, they physically alter your brain structure.
We're talking about neuroplasticity here.
Precisely. When you challenge yourself intellectually, you are literally opening new neural pathways. You're increasing synaptic connections. You are physically building a better, more complex brain.
So the gratitude isn't a feeling. It's a biological process.
That biological process is the gratitude. It's not a sentiment, it's a physiological event.
I love that image. Gratitude of the intellect isn't some warm, fuzzy feeling. It's the friction of neurons firing and making new connections. But the source then contrasts this with something that, at first, I found really counterintuitive. He talks about the danger of rote memorization and routine.
This is a fascinating point, and he cites a neurobiologist to back this up, which is important. The argument is that the brain is an energy hog.
Oh, yeah.
It consumes a huge amount of your body's resources. What is it? Something like 20% of your daily calories, even though it's a tiny part of your body weight.
This is burning through fuel.
All the time.
Yeah.
So biologically, your brain is always looking for shortcuts. It wants to conserve energy.
It wants to go on autopilot.
It absolutely wants to go on autopilot. And routine is the ultimate autopilot. When you memorize something by rote, just repeating a sound or a phrase over and over without thinking about the meaning, or when you do the same task the same way every single day, you are etching a deep groove in your mind.
Like a desire path in a park where the grass is all worn down because everyone takes the same shortcut.
That is a perfect analogy. And once that path is paved, the brain stops firing all those complex, energy-expensive networks. It just
glides down the easy path, and the source notes that this actually lowers the energy in the brain.
Which, on one hand sounds like a good thing, efficiency. But in this context, it's presented as a really bad thing.
It's the death of the intellect. If you aren't burning that energy, you aren't building those new connections, you're atrophying. And this leads to one of the sharpest analogies in the entire lecture.
The herd analogy.
The herd analogy.
This part stunned a little bit, I have to admit. He compares people who learn by rote people, who just follow the crowd without thinking, to a herd of cattle.
It's blunt, isn't it? But it serves a very specific purpose. He talks about how animals have a simple intelligence. You can have a herd of 100 cows, and they know where the barn is, they know the routine.
Right.
At sunset, they will walk back to the stable. They don't need a GPS, they don't need a leader to shout directions at them every step of the way.
They have the firmware installed, sun goes down, go to barn. It's just instinct.
It's instinct, it's pattern recognition.
Yeah.
And it works perfectly for them. But the source argues that humans are meant for a different kind of navigation. If a human being just follows the herd back to the barn, meaning they just follow tradition or social norms or what their parents believed, without ever once stopping to ask why.
They're operating on animal firmware.
Yes. They are acting like they have a simple intelligence when they were gifted a complex intelligence.
That is the ultimate ingratitude. You have a supercomputer in your skull, and you're using it like a pocket calculator.
Exactly. So the mission of this deep dive, and really the mission of the text he is analyzing, is to snap us out of that herd mentality.
So how do we do that? The source gives us a specific framework. He says, and this is a direct quote, "We came to this world not to possess it, but to witness it." This brings us to the core concept of the episode, shahada.
Witnessing.
Witnessing.
This is the philosophical anchor for the whole discussion. The word shahada in Arabic, it means to testify, to witness. The source frames all of human life as basically a courtroom drama.
I like that image. It's very active.
It is. The world, the entire universe, all of history, your daily life is the evidence presented to the court. And you are the witness on the stand. Your only job, your primary purpose for existing, is to look at all the evidence and testify truthfully about what you see.
So it's not about accumulating stuff. It's not about possessing the world, getting more houses, more cars. It's about accurately reporting on it.
Correct. And that sounds simple, but think about how incredibly hard that is. To look at something that is bad, maybe something that is profitable for you or something your herd loves, and have the courage to stand up and testify, no, that is bad.
Or to look at something good that is unpopular and testify, this is good.
Right. And that's where the internal judge comes in. The source talks about the conscience as an inner court.
Yeah.
He argues that you don't actually need an external judge to tell you if you are a decent human being. You have a court right there in your chest. Your conscience acts as the judge. And every time you speak, every time you act, you are submitting testimony to that court.
So if you lie, if you call tyranny justice, or you call lies truth, you are committing perjury in the court of your own soul.
That's it. And the source uses a very strong word for this: betrayal.
Betrayal.
Yes, it is a betrayal of the self, a betrayal of your very purpose. If you distort reality just to fit in with the herd, you've abandoned the witness stand, you've compromised the one job you were sent here to do.
This sets the stage perfectly for the actual text of Surah At-Tur, because the chapter begins with a series of oaths. It literally calls the list of witnesses to the stand.
It does.
And this is where we go from philosophy to this really granular, fascinating analysis of history and science.
It really does. But before we even name the witnesses, we have to talk about the grammar. I know grammar sounds boring, but trust me, this is cool.
Okay, I'm listening.
The verses start with the Arabic letter wa, and usually translators just write, "by the mountain," or "I swear by the mountain."
Like an oath. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth.
Exactly. But the source argues that this wa is doing something much more dynamic. He says it's not just an oath, it's a connector. It's a function that makes these objects speak. It's effectively saying, let the mountain take the stand. Let the book testify.
Wow, so it's not just a person swearing by an object. It's the object itself being called as a witness.
It turns these inanimate objects into active participants in the trial of humanity.
Okay, that is cool. So let's call the first witness At-Tur, the mountain.
Tur is an interesting word. In the local dialect of the time, it meant a great mountain, specifically one with some greenery or majesty to it. Think of Uludağ in Turkey. But in the context of the scripture, it almost always refers to Tur Sinai.
Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai, the Moses mountain, the place of revelation.
So that's the immediate connection for the audience of the text.
That's the primary association for sure.
But the source immediately broadens the scope. He points out that humans have always looked to mountains as this bridge between the earth and the divine.
Yeah, he mentions Mount Olympus, for the Greeks, Mount Ida.
The altar of Zeus. For as long as we've been human, we've looked up at these incredible peaks and thought, that's where the gods live, or that's where you go to meet God. Mountains are witnesses to human history, to our search for meaning. They are the oldest observers.
But then, right in the middle of this grand, sweeping historical talk, the speaker, Mustafa Islamoglu, drops this personal anecdote that just completely floored me. It stopped me in my tracks.
I know exactly the moment you mean. It's so powerful.
He starts talking about a specific mountain, Mount Ursius. It's this massive dormant volcano in central Turkey. And he takes us back to when he was 4 years old.
It's a heartbreaking image. He explains that his mother had just passed away. He was 4. He didn't know how to process that kind of loss. I mean, who does?
And he says he would climb up to the flat roof of their traditional mud brick house. Just a little kid climbing up there all alone. And he would just sit there and stare at the peak of Mount Ursius.
He uses a phrase that is so poetic and so heavy. He says he did it to console himself for the hunger of a mother. He was starving for that maternal presence, and the only thing big enough, permanent enough to handle that enormous grief was the mountain.
It just changes the whole vibe of the oath. Suddenly, it's not just God thundering from a peak. It's a little boy using the mountain as an anchor when his entire world is washed away.
It completely humanizes the witness.
Yeah.
The mountain wasn't just a geological formation to him. It was a companion. It was the only thing that wasn't leaving. In that silence, the mountain witnessed his grief, and he, in turn, witnessed the mountain's stability. It's such a profound way to connect this abstract witnessing concept to real human pain.
So we have the mountain as the first witness, an ancient, stable, personal observer. Then we move to the second witness, Kitab Mester.
The written book.
And here is where the interpretation shifts gears again. Usually, when a religious text says the book, people assume, oh, it means the Quran, or, it means the Bible.
The holy book of that tradition, yeah.
But the expert here says, not necessarily.
Right. He points out the grammar again. It's indefinite. It says a written book, not the written book. He argues this refers to any legible knowledge, but primarily he calls it the book of the universe.
The universe as a book. I've heard that metaphor before, but he takes it pretty literally.
He does. He says the universe is full of lines waiting to be read. Those lines are galaxies, black holes, solar systems, bacteria, mountains, and seas. Reality itself is a manuscript, and we are the readers.
Which implies that science, physics, biology, astronomy is actually the act of reading scripture.
Exactly. We'll definitely come back to that because it's a central theme. But this idea of the book segues perfectly into the third witness, which is where we get into that massive historical detour I promised at the start. The third witness is fi rakun menshur.
On unrolled parchment.
And this specific phrase triggers a deep dive into the history of information technology. The speaker asks, why parchment? Why not stone? Why not clay tablets? Why not paper? And to answer that, he takes us back to ancient Egypt.
This is the story of the first great information war.
It really is. So for centuries, the global standard for writing was papyrus. It's made from the birdie reeds that grow along the banks of the Nile. Egypt had a complete monopoly on it. If you wanted to write a scroll in Greece or Rome or Persia, you needed Egyptian papyrus.
It was the silicon chip of the ancient world.
That's a great comparison.
Yeah.
And the pharaohs knew it. They understood that knowledge is power. If you control the medium of writing, you control the flow of ideas, of culture, of government.
And so at one point, the pharaoh decided to weaponize this monopoly.
An embargo.
A total embargo. He prohibited the export of papyrus.
A total blockade. And this was specifically targeting the kingdom of Pergamon, which is in modern-day Turkey, near Bergama. Pergamon was building a massive library. They were becoming a serious cultural rival to Alexandria. The pharaoh basically wanted to shut them down. No paper for you.
Imagine that happening today. Imagine if one country just cut off access to the internet for a rival nation. It would be catastrophic.
Absolutely. Pergamon has all these scholars, all these poets, all these scribes, and suddenly they have nothing to write on.
So what do?
This is the beauty of human ingenuity. Necessity is the mother of invention. The people of Pergamon couldn't use reeds, so they looked at what they did have an abundance of.
Livestock.
Livestock, sheep, goats, gazelles, calves. They developed a complex technique to stretch, scrape, and dry animal skins under tension. They treated it with lime, and they created this new material that was thin, smooth and incredibly durable.
And they named it after their city.
Pashumin. Parchment. The word literally comes from Pergamon.
That is one of those facts that just blows my mind. Every time we say the word parchment, we are referencing this ancient trade war, this act of defiance.
And the incredible irony is, the Pharaoh's embargo backfired spectacularly. Papyrus is organic plant matter. It rots, it gets brittle, it falls apart in humidity. Most of it hasn't survived. Parchment. Parchment is tough. It lasts for thousands of years. By trying to kill the library of Pergamon, the pharaoh actually forced them to invent the medium that would preserve Western civilization.
If they had stuck with papyrus, half of those ancient texts might have just turned to dust.
It's very likely, yes. So the witness here, the unrolled parchment, is a testimony to human resilience and the preservation of knowledge against the forces of tyranny.
And speaking of preserving knowledge, the source connects this to Alexander the Great. Now, usually we think of Alexander as a conqueror, a guy with a sword and an empire.
Right, the military genius.
But the source highlights his role as a data collector. He mentions that when Alexander went on his campaigns toward the east, he didn't just take soldiers. He took 2,000 of Aristotle's students with him.
2,000, that's a massive research team.
It's a traveling university. He took botanists to study new plants, astronomers to map the southern stars, mathematicians, geographers, historians. They were collecting data from the book of the universe.
And the source argues that this massive collection of knowledge, this data haul, is what eventually founded the Library of Alexandria.
It really reframes the idea of conquest. He wasn't just conquering land, he was conquering ignorance. Well, and land. He definitely conquered the land, too.
He definitely conquered the land, let's be clear. But the intellectual legacy is what the source focuses on. And while we're on the topic of books and words, there's a quick linguistic critique the source throws in that I found really interesting.
Oh, right, about the word Bible.
The distinction between Bible and Gospel. The speaker notes that Bible comes from Byblos, a city in Lebanon. Byblos was the other major hub for the papyrus trade. So the word Bible just refers to the physical objects, the scroll, the book.
Like saying the Kindle instead of the name of the story you're in.
Exactly. Whereas gospel, or Injil in Arabic, means the good news. It's the content. And he critiques theologians who mix these up, arguing that you need to be precise and distinguish between the container, the Bible book, and the content. The gospel, good news.
It's a call for intellectual rigor, even in language. Okay, so we've got the mountain, the book, the parchment. What's witness number 4?
El Beit el-Mamur.
The flourishing house.
The flourishing house. Now, in traditional Islamic cosmology, this is often interpreted as something very metaphysical, the sort of Kaaba in the heavens where angels worship.
Okay, very abstract.
Very, but our expert here brings it right back down to earth with a thud.
As he tends to do.
He redefines Mamur. We often think Mamur means a building that is physically impressive, made of gold or marble or high-tech solid concrete, but the source says no. A house is only Mamur, it is only flourishing, if it has humans living in it.
That's such a human-centric shift.
Yeah.
So you could have a palace, a mansion, but if it's empty, it's a ruin.
It's a ruin. But you could have a tiny shack, and if a family is inside eating dinner and laughing and talking, that house is flourishing. The value of the structure depends entirely on the life that is inside it. Architecture serves humanity, not the other way around.
I love that. And finally, the 5th witness. Al-Bahr al-Miskur.
The swelling sea, or the boiling sea.
The sea that overflows or is set on fire. It's an image of immense power and volatility. So look at the lineup of witnesses we have now.
Yep.
Mountain, geology, book cosmology, parchment, history and technology, a flourishing house, sociology and human life, and the sea.
Oceanography. It's the entire physical world.
It is. And this brings us to the big so what question. Why is the text swearing by these things? The host in the source material asks this directly. Why doesn't God just swear by himself? Why swear by a mountain or a piece of parchment?
And the expert's answer is so blunt. Get off my back.
Get off my back. That's the divine message.
That's how he interprets it. He argues that humans are obsessed with the metaphysical, the unseen, the gabe. We want to argue about angels and the nature of God and the afterlife. All these things we can't see or touch or measure.
And the text is essentially saying,
stop asking about the things I haven't shown you and look at the things I have shown you. Look at the mountain. Look at the ocean. Look at the incredible history of writing. Study what's in front of you.
So by swearing by these physical objects, the text is validating the physical world. It's validating science.
Precisely. The source distinguishes between what he calls 2 wings of knowledge. Gabe, which is the unseen, is the domain of faith, You believe in it because you trust the source. Shahada, the witnessed, is the domain of science. You observe it.
You don't believe in Mount Everest in the same way.
Exactly. You don't have faith in photosynthesis. You observe them. You measure them. They exist. And his critique is that religious people often try to use the tools of faith to understand the physical world, which leads to superstition, or they ignore the physical world entirely to focus only on the unseen,
which leads to ignorance.
And he calls the physical universe God's exoteric book, his open book. If you refuse to read it, if you refuse to study science, you are essentially illiterate in God's primary language.
And to prove he's not just using science as some vague buzzword, the speaker goes on this surprisingly detailed tangent about genetics. He calls it the Book of Genetics.
This is where we get the endosymbiosis discussion. And for a lecture that starts with theology, this is pretty advanced biology.
He talks about the deep history of the cell.
Right. He traces the written book right into our own DNA. He specifically mentions mitochondrial DNA, which gives us that direct, unbroken line of matrilineal descent going back billions of years. But the story he tells about the origin of the mitochondria is the real kicker.
This is the Great Merger.
The Great Merger. About, 1.5 to 2 billion years ago, life on Earth was just single-celled organisms. Bacteria, prokaryotes. They had no nucleus. And they were very, very inefficient energy-wise. They were like biological AA batteries. They just couldn't power complex life.
And then one day, a big bacteria gets hungry.
A large predatory bacteria engulfs a smaller, more specialized bacteria. Now, 99.9% of the time, this is just lunch. The big one digests the small one. End of story. But in this one miraculous world-changing instance, digestion didn't happen.
The little guy survived inside the big guy.
And they struck a deal. A biological contract was formed. The little bacteria basically said, I'll give you ATP pure, high-octane energy if you give me protection and a steady supply of nutrients. That little prisoner became the mitochondria, the power plant of the cell.
And because of that massive power upgrade,
life could scale. We went from low-energy simple cells to high-energy complex cells, the eukaryotes. That evolutionary leap allowed for multicellular life, plants, animals, dinosaurs, us. We only exist because of that ancient merger, that ancient act of cooperation.
And the source is arguing that this story, this incredible biological epic, is part of the book we are supposed to be reading.
Yes, he's saying the written book isn't just ink on paper from 1,400 years ago. It's written in the sequences of our DNA. It's written in the fossil layers of the Earth.
He then connects this biological climb to a philosophical concept he calls the steep slope, or akabi.
Life is an uphill climb. It's not easy. It's like climbing that mountain we talked about earlier. And he argues that the very first step of this climb, the absolute prerequisite for being human, is freedom.
Freedom from what?
Freedom from the herd. Freedom of will. He makes a very, very strong statement here. Without free will, faith is invalid.
That's a bold theological stance.
Yeah. It cuts against a lot of tradition. He critiques the idea of inheriting your religion. He says, just because your parents were Muslim or Christian or Jewish doesn't mean you are. If you just inherit it like a surname without thought or choice, it's not faith. It's just culture. It's instinct. You're still in the herd.
You have to choose it.
You have to choose it. You have to climb the slope yourself. He quotes this verse from the Quran, "O you who believe, believe," which sounds redundant.
Yeah, what does that mean?
It means you claim to believe, now actually do the work of believing. Question it, test it, make it your own. Stop coasting on someone else's faith.
I want to shift gears now to the historical section, because there are two major historical events the source analyzes that really highlight this battle between truth and witnessing on one side and manipulation on the other.
Okay.
The first one involves a clay tablet found in Turkey.
The Kultepe tablets, this is archaeology meeting theology, and it's fantastic. Kultepe, or Kanish as it was known, was an ancient Assyrian trading colony near modern-day Kayseri.
And we're talking really ancient, almost 4,000 years ago.
About 3,700 years ago, yes. Archaeologists have found thousands and thousands of clay tablets there. Most of them are, pretty standard business contracts, receipts. I sold you 5 donkeys, you owe me 20 shekels of silver.
Riveting stuff.
Not exactly a bestseller. But one of these contracts is fascinating. It lists the witnesses to the deal. You have the buyer, the seller, and then a list of witnesses. And one of the witnesses listed is Ashkashiba.
Which is? Don't tell me.
The ancient Hittite and Assyrian name for Mount Urses.
No way.
Yes. So Nearly 4 millennia ago, people were looking up at that massive, silent mountain and saying, "We humans might lie, but the mountain doesn't lie. Let the mountain be the witness to this contract."
That is incredible. It completely validates the Quranic metaphor. When the text swears by the mountain, it's referencing a cultural practice, a way of thinking that was already ancient when the text was written.
It shows that the human need for a silent, truthful, permanent witness is universal. We crave something solid in a world of shifting human lies.
Speaking of human lies, let's talk about the trial of Socrates. This is the second historical deep dive. We all know the basic story. Socrates was executed by the city of Athens. We usually hear he was killed for corrupting the youth and impiety, but the source focuses on who killed him.
The villain of the story, a man named Meletus. And the source emphasizes one crucial detail about Meletus. He was a poet.
A poet. Now, today, if I say beware of the poets, it sounds ridiculous. Poets are harmless. They read haikus. They, struggle to pay rent.
Right. But we have to adjust our lens to the ancient world. In Athens, poets weren't just artists. They were the media. They were the perception managers.
The source compares them to, essentially to internet trolls.
Trolls, PR firms, spin doctors, propagandists. Think about it. There was no TV, no Twitter, no newspapers. Public opinion was shaped by the theater, by recited verse, by satire. If a powerful poet wrote a hit piece on you, a play mocking you, making you look foolish, the whole city would turn against you.
So Meletus wasn't just some sensitive guy with a rhyming dictionary. He was a political operative with a powerful weapon.
He was a manipulator of mass emotion. The source describes poets in this specific context as people who use beautiful words to sell ugly lies. They operate in the realm of illusion. Socrates, on the other hand, operated in the realm of reason.
He asked questions.
He demanded definitions. He was doing gratitude of the intellect. He was forcing people to think.
And the conflict was the man of reason versus the man of perception management.
And perception management won. Meletus managed to whip the jury into a frenzy. They voted by a slim margin to execute the most honest man in Athens.
It's a chilling warning about democracy, actually. If the herd is manipulated by the poets, just disguise.
And the source notes that Athens regretted it bitterly later. Meletus was eventually executed or exiled when the public fever broke, but the lesson stands. Be wary of those who manipulate language to bypass your reason. Be wary of the trolls.
This theme of manipulation via sacred symbols comes up again in a story about the prophet and a different kind of poet. This is the story of the burda, or the cloak.
This is a dark turn in the history he's recounting. So there was a poet named Ka'b bin Zuhar. He had been a fierce enemy of Islam, wrote nasty satirical verses about the prophet. Later, he had a change of heart, came to Medina, apologized, and converted. As a gesture of forgiveness, the prophet took off his own cloak, his burda, and placed it on the poet's shoulders.
So it was a symbol of, I forgive you, a deeply personal gesture.
Exactly. It was about grace and reconciliation. But fast forward a few decades, the prophet has passed away, the era of the rightly guided caliphs is over, and now we have Muawiyah, the first Umayyad caliph. He's a king, essentially, a political ruler establishing a dynasty.
And he wants the cloak.
He wants that cloak.
Yeah.
He offers the poet's heirs a staggering sum of money, 30,000 dirhams, a fortune, and he buys it.
Why? Was he a collector of religious artifacts?
No. He's a politician. He wears the cloak to Friday prayers. He wears it to official functions. He is using the prophet's cloak as a prop for his own political legitimacy. He's sending a message. Look, I am wrapped in the forgiveness of the prophet, therefore you must obey me.
He turned a symbol of spiritual grace into a uniform of political power.
It's the commodification of the sacred, the ultimate misuse of a tool. And the source compares this to another figure, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who was known as the leader of the hypocrites in Medina. When he was on his deathbed, he made a strange request. He asked for the prophet's shirt to be used as his burial shroud.
He thought the shirt would somehow protect him in the grave.
He thought it was magic. He thought, I lived a life of lies and deception, but if I'm wrapped in this holy fabric, God won't see the lies, he'll just see the shirt.
That is pure magical thinking. It's treating religion like a cheat code to get out of being judged.
And the source just mocks this mercilessly. He connects it directly to modern-day religious fraudsters. He talks about people selling yanmaz kifin, which translates to fireproof shrouds.
Wait, fireproof shrouds?
Yes.
As in fireproof from the fires of hell?
Yes. There are actual charlatans today who sell burial shrouds with special prayers and symbols written on them, claiming that if you are buried in this, the angels of punishment can't touch you. It's a guaranteed entry pass to heaven.
That is I mean, it's an obvious scam,
Yeah.
but it's a specific kind of scam.
It's the exact same mentality as the hypocrite with the prophet's shirt. It's the idea that you can bypass the witnessing. You can bypass the accounting of your own deeds, your good, your bad, your truth, your lies, and just use a talisman, a magic object to save yourself. The source says this is a profound insult to God. You can't trick the judge with a costume.
This brings us to a section that was, frankly, very difficult to listen to, but I think we have to talk about it. The story of the doctor.
Yeah, this is the story of Cüneyt Arkın.
And for our listeners who aren't Turkish, Cüneyt Arkın is a massive icon. He's like the Clint Eastwood or the John Wayne of Turkish cinema, the ultimate action hero, tough guy, a true legend.
Absolutely. But before he was Cüneyt Arkın, the movie star, he was Fahrettin Kırakli Batur. And he wasn't an actor, he was a medical doctor.
He was a legitimate physician.
Yes. And the source tells the story of why he quit medicine. As a young doctor, he was sent to do his mandatory service in a remote village in Anatolia. He arrives, and there is an immediate crisis. A woman is in labor. It's a very difficult childbirth. And she is dying. The baby is stuck.
He has the skills to save her. He knows what to do.
He knows exactly what to do, but he is a man. And the woman's family, her husband, her father, the men of the village, they block the door. They pull guns on him.
They wouldn't let him enter the room.
They said, a male doctor cannot see her nakedness. It is forbidden.
Even to save her life.
Even to save her life.
Yeah.
They forced him to try and perform the delivery and eventually an injection through her clothes, through her traditional baggy trousers, the shalwar. So he's trying to find a vein or deliver a baby completely blind with guns pointed at his head while a woman is screaming in agony.
That is a nightmare scenario.
And the inevitable happened. The woman died. The baby died.
Because of, what, honor? A twisted interpretation of religion.
Ignorance. The source is absolutely furious about this. He says the doctor, in his trauma and disgust, threw down his stethoscope and said, I can't do this. He quit medicine and went into acting. But the lesson isn't about him. It's about the devastating cost of ignorance.
It just shows that ignorance isn't victimless. We tend to think, oh, let people believe what they want. It doesn't hurt anyone. But this kind of ignorance, this distortion of religion that values a man-made rule about modesty over the sanctity of two human lives, it kills people.
It kills women. It kills babies. And the source argues it kills religion itself. It turns faith into a monster.
This connects directly to his discussion on tyranny and the definition of God. The source takes a very interesting linguistic detour on the word azab.
Azab, yes. Usually in the Quran, this is translated as punishment or torment, fire and brimstone. But the source argues that the root meaning is actually deprivation, to be cut off from something essential, like being cut off from water.
So azab isn't God actively torturing you. It's you being deprived of God's mercy because of your own actions.
Yes. And he makes a very strong theological claim. God is not a torturer. He says the popular image of God as a being who invents creative ways to inflict pain is a human projection.
A projection of whom?
Of earthly tyrants. He argues that kings, dictators, and sultans who used torture to control their populations needed to justify their own cruelty, and they often called themselves the shadow of God on earth.
So if the king tortures people,
then the God he claims to represent must be the ultimate torturer. They remade God in their own violent image to validate their own crimes. It's political psychology masquerading as theology.
that is a chilling insight. You can look at the theology of a society and you can see the shadow of its political system.
Exactly. And the source warns that those who cover up the truth, again, the kafir in its literal sense, eventually fall into their own traps. You can't build a worldview on lies and torture without it eventually collapsing on you.
We're nearing the end of our deep dive here, but we have to address one final target, the source attacks. Fortune-telling.
Oh, he really goes after this. Coming at soothsaying, horoscopes, all of it.
He seems to have a real fundamental problem with the idea that anyone can know the future.
It's an epistemological issue for him. It's about what is knowable. He cites a verse where the prophet himself is instructed by God to say to the people, I do not know what will be done to me or to you.
That seems pretty clear. I, the prophet, do not know the future.
Crystal clear. But then he contrasts this with the herd mentality again. He points out that there are entire volumes of later traditions, the hadith, that claim the prophet knew everything that would happen until Judgment Day, down to the smallest detail.
So you have a direct conflict. The Quran says he doesn't know. The later traditions say he knew everything.
And the source asks the listener, who are you going to believe? If you believe the traditions, he argues, you are essentially calling the Quran a liar. It's a crisis of sources.
But why are people so obsessed with fortune-telling? Why do we want to know the future so badly?
Because we want to give up our agency. We want a script. If I know what's going to happen, I don't have to worry about making the right choices. I don't have to climb the slope. The source argues that predicting the future is a form of intellectual treason.
It's treason because it steals the future from God.
And it steals the responsibility from you. It was used by ancient priests to control kings. The stars say "do intact today." And by kings to control the masses. It's a control mechanism. The source says the unseen, Gabe, is closed. It's not for us. Our job is the witnessed, Shahada.
Stop trying to peek at the last page of the book and just focus on writing your own chapter.
Beautifully put. Write your testimony. That's the job.
So let's bring this all home. This has been a massive journey. We've gone from neuroplasticity to the invention of parchment, from the trial of Socrates to the mitochondria in our cells. What is the single thread that ties all of this together?
The thread is the mountain, the witness.
The mountain that witnessed the Assyrian traders making a deal. The mountain that witnessed Moses receiving revelation. The mountain that witnessed the silent grief of a 4-year-old boy.
The final message is that we are all on the witness stand. The source quotes a powerful verse. Every soul is held in pledge for what it earns. We are hostages.
Hostages, that's a strong word.
We are hostages to our own actions. We are held as collateral. And the only way to ransom yourself, to free yourself, is through your choices. If you choose ignorance, if you choose the herd, if you choose the comfort of lies, you remain a hostage.
But if you choose gratitude of the intellect.
If you choose to reason, to question, to study the book of the universe, to stand up to the poets and the manipulators, then you pay your own ransom. You free yourself. You become a true witness.
It really redefines what it means to be religious or spiritual. It's not about how many prayers you've memorized. It's about how clearly you see reality.
And how bravely you speak about it.
I have one final thought, a provocative thought to leave our listeners with. The source spent so much time arguing that the universe is a written book and that science is the act of reading it.
Yes, that was a constant theme.
If that's true, does that mean that scientists, biologists, physicists, astronomers, even the ones who claim to be atheists, are actually the most pious readers of this divine scripture?
That is the implication, isn't it? If the universe is God's book, then the people who dedicate their lives to studying it are the ones doing the actual reading. Everyone else is just talking about the cover.
And conversely, if we as a society stop valuing science, if we stop reading the parchment and the genetics, do we lose the ability to understand the author?
Are we just reading the book, or are we kissing the cover and putting it on a high shelf never to be opened?
That is the question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
It has. See you next time.
Welcome back. Today we're looking at a really dense, ambitious exegesis of Surah At-Tur.
Yeah, this one was a lot. It was packed.
It's blending Quranic interpretation with, everything from Alexander the Great to mitochondria and some pretty sharp social critique.
Right, let's dive in. Where do you want to start?
Okay, so the first big thing that jumped out at me was the overall structure. The piece struggles to maintain a cohesive narrative thread because it is just crushed under the weight of its own interdisciplinary ambition.
That's a strong start. Crushed. You think it's too much? I have to say, I found some of the connections, between the theology and the science, kind of exhilarating. It felt like a kaleidoscope.
It is exhilarating, I agree, but a kaleidoscope can be dizzying if you're trying to walk a straight line, right? And I think the weakness here is that the transitions between the deep theological points and the historical or scientific trivia, they're just so abrupt, they're almost disorienting.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, the speaker jumps from the etymology of Tur, connecting Mount Sinai to Oludadah, and then, boom, we're straight into a detailed history of paper manufacturing.
The papyrus versus parchment thing.
Right.
From the mountain of Moses to the factory floor of Pergamon in about 10 seconds flat.
And then, just as quickly, we're marching with Alexander the Great's army.
Exactly.
And you haven't even had time to process that before we're deep in a cell talking about mitochondria.
And while they're all fascinating points on their own,
They are, yeah.
but the rapid-fire way they're connected makes it really hard for the audience to follow the central argument about the surah itself. It does feel a little like a stream of consciousness, but I wonder, isn't that maybe the point? Like, the author is trying to show how this written book, the Kitab-i-Mastur, is reflected in absolutely everything.
I think that's the intent, for sure.
So if you organize it too neatly, do you lose that feeling of, omnipresence?
You might lose a little of that chaotic feeling, but you gain so much clarity. And for an argument this complex, I think clarity is essential. So the suggestion isn't to cut any of this great content, it's to use what you could call thematic clustering.
Thematic clustering. So group the related ideas together.
Right. Right now the illustrations are just scattered like confetti. We need to put them in piles.
Okay, I can see that. So instead of just sprinkling them throughout?
Exactly. Let's take a concrete example. The whole history of Alexander the Great and the Library of Alexandria is woven right into the middle of defining Kitab al-Mashtur. It actually interrupts the theological point.
Yeah, it does pause that thought.
So a better approach would be to group all the historical analogies about recording information into one distinct section.
I see. So you'd set the stage with humanity's attempts to record knowledge. Alexander, the library, the scrolls, and then you contrast that with the divine recording.
Yes. That way, the listener isn't constantly switching gears. And look at the part on the unrolled scroll, the Frugriken Manshur. The text just sort of drifts off into a sidebar about paper moving from China to Samarkand.
I have to admit, I loved that part. The detail about the Tullis War and the Chinese prisoners teaching paper making, that's great trivia.
It is great trivia, but does it really serve the verse in that moment? The listener is suddenly thinking about wood pulp and cellulose instead of revelation.
Fair point.
So a concrete fix is to tie the history of parchment, especially that Pergamon connection, directly back to the unrolled scroll right away. Don't let the listener drift off to China unless you can show them exactly how that road leads back to the theology.
If the road to Samarkand is a detour, you can't afford it. Got it. What about the biological metaphors, like the cow finding its way back to the barn?
That's another perfect example. The anecdote is meant to illustrate instinct versus reason, which is great, but the speaker just lets it hang there.
It did feel a bit unfinished, like, here's the cow, now on to the next verse.
Exactly. To fix that, you just need to finish the thought. Establish the hierarchy of witnessing, the animal's instinct versus human intellect, wrap that section up tight, and then move on. Don't intersperse them.
It's about managing the cognitive load. You're basically telling the listener, okay, we're done with animal instinct for now. Let's open the next drawer.
Correct. And this structural issue, it actually bleeds directly into the second big area for improvement, which is the tonal consistency.
Ah, yes, I had a feeling we were going to get here. It is an emotional roller coaster.
It oscillates violently, doesn't it? The lecture goes from this persona of, a gentle spiritual guide.
Very poetic.
To an aggressive, almost angry social critic.
It really does. 1 minute, we're in this sublime, meditative space, contemplating the inhabited house, the Beit ul Ma'mur, or the raised canopy of the universe. It's beautiful. And then bam.
Wham is right. We're suddenly in a sharp, cynical attack on social issues.
The fireproof shroud scams, the Jan Muskefin, and the attacks on literalist interpreters of religion.
And the weakness isn't the critique itself. I mean, those are valid things to critique. It's the jarring switch. It risks alienating the people who are following the spiritual logic because they're just not prepared for the sudden polemic.
It feels like 2 different lectures got spliced together.
It does.
But couldn't there be a value in that shock? Maybe the author wants to wake the audience up. If you're talking about witnessing reality, maybe you have to show the ugly parts of it too.
Shock is fine, but it has to be earned, and it has to be connected. If you just pivot from poetry to anger, the audience pulls back. They go on the defensive.
So what's the solution?
The suggestion is to use what I'd call implication bridges instead of these emotional pivots.
Implication bridges. Okay, walk me through that. How do you get from the raised canopy to a scam artist without giving the listener whiplash?
You have to show that the social critique is a direct consequence of the theological truth. Let's take the literalist interpretation of the well-fed horses for war.
Right.
Currently, the text just mocks them as ridiculous for, thinking they need actual horses today.
It is a bit mocking. Look at these people stuck in the past.
Right. But instead of that, you could explain why a metaphorical reading aligns better with the surah's theme of witnessing. The bridge would sound something like this. If we witness the text truly, we look for the intent, which is readiness and strength, not the literal object. To focus only on the horse is to fail to witness the concept of power.
That's good. So you're saying their error isn't just that they're being stupid, it's that they are failing to witness correctly?
Exactly. You anchored the critique in the central theme of the lecture. This applies even more to that powerful doctor anecdote. Kunyeta Arkin?
Oh, that story is just gut-wrenching. The doctor who couldn't treat the woman because of her male relative's ignorance, and she died. It's so powerful, but I admit, I wasn't totally sure why it was there.
It feels inserted randomly, right? Because it's framed only as a story about ignorance.
Yeah.
But we can make it a theological pillar. We frame the story as a violation of the inhabited house, the Beit ul-Mamur.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yes, if the Beit ul-Mamur represents the human body or the world being inhabited and kept functional, then ignorance that leads to a preventable death is the destruction of that house.
So you explicitly link it back. You say this ignorance left the house of her body in ruins rather than inhabited.
You got it. And that transforms the whole thing. It stops being a rant about bad religious people and becomes this tragic example of failing to uphold a Quranic ideal. And it keeps the audience with you.
They're not being yelled at, they're being shown the stakes.
And speaking of stakes, we need to talk about the evidence. This brings us to the third point, precision in the scientific and historical analogies.
I was waiting for this one, the mitochondria.
The mitochondria. Look, the piece relies really heavily on external data to validate scripture. And the issue is, when you use science or history as hard proof for a theological claim, you have to be incredibly accurate.
Because if you miss,
you don't just weaken the scientific point, you risk undermining the spiritual argument it's attached to.
right, the speaker talks about the mother's signature in mitochondrial DNA and the timeline of eukaryotic evolution being exactly 1.5 billion years. It's presented as hard evidence for the written book.
And don't forget Alexander the Great having exactly 2,000 of Aristotle's students in his army.
That one felt very specific. Like, did somebody do a head count?
Exactly. It feels like hyperbole that's being presented as fact. And the weakness is, if a listener spots that oversimplification, or they know that mitochondrial DNA is more of a genetic marker than a literal signature, they might just discount the whole theological insight.
They'll think, well, if he's exaggerating about Alexander, maybe he's exaggerating about the Surah too.
Precisely.
But wait, the science isn't totally wrong in a broad sense. We do inherit mitochondrial from our mothers. It is a record. Is there a way to keep that coolness without the risk?
Yes, absolutely. It just requires a small shift in framing. The suggestion is to frame these examples as resonance or analogy, rather than proof.
So soften the claim a little.
You make it more durable. Instead of saying, gene science witnesses this as some absolute verification, you can phrase it as, the way we understand genetic inheritance today offers a modern parallel to this concept of a recorded book in nature.
A modern parallel. I like that. It's safe. It means even if our understanding of genetics changes in 50 years, the theology still holds.
You're not marrying the eternal text to a temporary scientific model. You're just pointing out a harmony. The same goes for the paper history we talked about earlier.
The China to Samarkand route.
Right. When you're discussing it, clarify that this is an illustration of how knowledge spreads. Don't get bogged down in the mechanics of cellulose and wood pulp unless that chemistry is itself being used as a metaphor.
I guess I see that. I admit I got a little lost in the paper mill and kind of forgot we were talking about an unrolled scroll of Revelation.
That's the danger. The mechanics distract from the verse. It's all about discipline.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that discipline leads us to the final and maybe the most important point of critique, the actionability of the witnessing concept.
This is the core thesis of the entire lecture, right? That humans are here to witness, shahid omak, rather than to possess, sahib omak.
It's a profound distinction. It really is. It can change how you see your entire life. But here's the problem. The piece defines witnessing in a very abstract way.
We hear a lot about what it isn't. It's not being a literalist. It's not being the ignoramus who lets his relative die. It's not being a bad witness to your own conscience.
We get all the negatives, but the listener is left without a clear map of what witnessing actually looks like in a positive daily practice. The weakness is a lack of operationalization.
The speaker mentions climbing Urshes or the Alps with Nietzsche. That's a positive example.
It is, but it's also pretty esoteric. Most of us aren't climbing the Alps tomorrow. If witnessing is the purpose of my life, how do I do it when I'm washing the dishes or at my desk job?
Right.
So the suggestion is to dedicate the whole conclusion to operationalizing this concept.
Give us an instruction manual to go with the philosophy.
You got it. We need concrete examples. So, the speaker mentions climbing mountains. Expand on that. Don't just say, I climbed a mountain. Ask the audience, is witnessing purely intellectual or is it physical? Give them a practice. Next time you're outside, don't try to capture it in a photo to possess it. Just stand there and name what you see. That's witnessing.
I like that. It's small, but it's real. What about the text itself? How do we make the critique of the literalists actionable?
You convert the criticism into a positive instruction. Instead of just bashing the literalists, say something like, witnessing the text means looking for the intent behind the words every single time. Before you act on a verse, ask yourself, what function was this meant to serve?
That's actionable. It gives the listener a tool they can use the next time they open the Quran.
And we can bring back the Beit al-Ma'mur metaphor one last time.
The inhabited house.
Use it to give a concrete command. To witness a house is to keep it inhabited and functional for human service, not just to build it with gold bricks. And then you bring it home. In your daily life, look at your environment, your home, your office. Are you making it functional for humanity? If you fix a broken door, you are witnessing the inhabited house.
That's beautiful. It takes this huge philosophy out of the clouds and puts it right on the pavement. Fixing the door is witnessing. That sticks with you.
It does, and that is what a piece this ambitious and resonant deserves. It really does challenge the listener to rethink their relationship with everything.
It has so much heart. The passion is just undeniable.
Which is exactly why these structural edits are so important. We want that heart to beat clearly, without the arrhythmia of bad transitions.
Okay, so to recap everything for the listener.
First, use thematic clustering. Group your historical and scientific anecdotes. Put the parchment history in one box and the biology in another, so they don't interrupt the theological flow.
Second, watch the tone. Use those implication bridges to connect the high spiritual concepts to the gritty social critique. Don't just flip a switch from poetry to anger.
Third, prioritize precision. Frame your science and history as analogies or resonances, not as absolute proofs. Don't let a guess about Alexander the Great's army undercut your credibility.
And finally, and most importantly, make it actionable. Give us a checklist. Tell us how to witness in the grocery store, not just on a mountaintop.
We really encourage the listener to take these suggestions, refine the draft, and submit their work back in again. We would love to see how this piece evolves.
Absolutely. It's a diamond in the rough. A little bit of polish and it's going to shine so brightly.
Thank you for listening to The Critique. Keep writing, keep improving.
And keep witnessing.
Goodbye.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we're taking a sledgehammer to the way religious texts are traditionally consumed. We are diving into a truly provocative analysis of Surah At-Tur, the Mount. But let me be clear right off the bat. This isn't a sermon. The material we're dissecting today argues that these texts aren't literal instruction manuals for ritual, but are actually cosmic calls to witness the universe through reason, intellect, and hard science.
It is a fascinating, if somewhat radical proposition. We're essentially wrestling with a single massive question today. Does true piety lie in the preservation of tradition, in the rote memorization of sacred words, or does it require a radical deconstruction of those traditions to engage with the physical world where, mountains and history and biology become the primary text?
Exactly. And to put my cards on the table, I'm representing the perspective that the source material demands a shift from what it calls verbal gratitude to active reasoning. I believe the argument here is that the text is a call to break routines, reject literalism, and view the entire universe from black holes to bacteria as a written book to be decoded by intellect.
And I'll be taking the opposing view. I come at it from a different way. While I absolutely appreciate the intellectual rigor, I am skeptical of the source's expansive, almost aggressive metaphorical interpretations. I question whether stripping away traditional boundaries, equating specific holy sites with, say, local mountains, or reinterpreting spiritual entities like jinn as mere humans, risks losing the specific historical and moral essence of the text in favor of a kind of vague scientific appreciation.
I see why you'd think that, but let's start with the foundation. The source material opens with a concept that completely reframes the idea of gratitude or shukr. Now, usually when we think of gratitude in a religious context, we think of saying thank you or alhamdulillah. But the source argues this is superficial. It posits that true gratitude is fulfilling the specific biological function for which an organ was created.
That is a very specific, almost utilitarian definition of a theological concept.
It's biological. Think about the brain. The source argues that the brain's primary function is creating new synaptic connections. It's all about neuroplasticity. If you aren't questioning why and how, if you aren't building new neural pathways, then you aren't being grateful. You are letting the organ atrophy. You're essentially wasting the hardware.
That's a compelling biological analogy, I'll give you that. But the source takes it to a rather harsh place socially. It compares traditional believers to herd animals.
It does, and it doesn't pull any punches. It mentions cows or sheep that know the way to the barn after 20 years. Now, do they know the way because they're smart? No, they know it because of routine. They're on autopilot. The source posits that human beings who rely on routine and memorization in their faith are no different. They have 20 years of experience, but it's really just 1 year of experience repeated 20 times. They know the ritual, but they lack the spark of witnessing.
And this is where I start to push back. While the critique of autopilot faith is valid, no one wants a mindless religion, there is a danger in dismissing routine entirely. Rituals create containers for experience. By calling it herd behavior, the source seems to be devaluing the communal aspect of faith, which relies on shared, repeated practices. It frames intellect as the only path to God, which feels incredibly elitist. What about the person who isn't a neuroscientist but has a deep, quiet faith?
I think the source would argue that quiet faith is fine, but blind faith is dangerous. And this brings us to the first major pillar of the debate, the definition of the book. The surah swears by the inscribed book, Kitab-e-Mestor. Now, traditionally, people assume this means the Quran or a specific holy scripture on a shelf. The source says, no, it's more specific than that, though. The source analyzes the phrase, fi rukin manshur, in an unrolled parchment. Now, why parchment? Why not paper? Why not stone tablets? The source takes us on this incredible detour into the history of information technology to explain this choice of words.
Detour is the right word. It spends a significant amount of time discussing the difference between Chinese reeds and Egyptian papyrus. I admit I was wondering where he was going with the botany lesson.
But the botany is the point. Look at the history. You had Egyptian papyrus made from Nilotic reeds. The pharaohs controlled it. It was the monopoly on information storage in the ancient world. The source describes how the pharaoh banned the export of papyrus to control knowledge, because keeping people in the dark makes them easier to rule. It's the ancient equivalent of a tech embargo or a firewall.
Information is power, as the source says. I don't dispute the history there.
But look at the reaction. Because of that embargo, the people in Pergamum, modern-day Bergama, had to innovate. They couldn't get papyrus, so they invented parchment. Parchemen, using animal skins, gazelle, calf. This broke the monopoly. The source argues that when the text swears by an unrolled parchment, it is swearing by the democratization of knowledge. It's celebrating the moment humanity broke the chains of information control.
It's a brilliant historical narrative, certainly. Connecting the Library of Alexandria and the invention of parchment to the Quranic verse is poetic. But here is my issue. The Library of Alexandria was a center of secular knowledge. It was largely pagan at the time. Is the source suggesting that the Quran is validating secular, pagan history as the book?
Yes, that is exactly the point. Knowledge is knowledge. The inscribed book isn't just the verses on a page. It's the evolution of human thought. It's the open source movement of the ancient world.
But the source goes a step further, and this is where I think it might be overreaching. It identifies the book in the text as a scroll, or tomar, that must be unrolled to have value. It implies that a closed book is useless. So the implication is, if you aren't reading science, history, and nature, you aren't reading the book of God.
Correct. If the book is closed, it's just an object.
But isn't that projecting a modern information age value system onto an ancient text? We live in an era obsessed with data. The source seems to glorify the mechanism of information storage, parchment versus papyrus, as if the technology itself is the revelation. If the book is just the universe and the history of parchment, then you are essentially saying that studying geology is a religious act equal to prayer.
And I would argue that is the most profound claim the source makes. If God created the universe, then studying the history of parchment or the biology of a cell or the formation of a star is studying the handwriting of the creator. You can't separate the artist from the art. This leads directly to the second point of contention, the frequented house, Beit al-Mamur, and the function of objects.
This was another radical redefinition.
It's a functional redefinition. The source focuses on the word ma'mur. In Arabic and Turkish, it implies something prosperous, inhabited, flourishing. The argument is simple but devastating. A building, even the Kaaba, even a mosque, is only ma'mur if it serves humans. The source explicitly states, a house without people is a ruin, regardless of gold bricks.
I recall the phrasing, to make a place ma'mur is to functionalize it.
Exactly. And the source shares that deeply personal anecdote. Did that not resonate with you? The speaker talks about being a 4-year-old child, motherless, climbing to the roof to look at Mount Ursius. He was looking for solace. He was witnessing the mountain to soothe a psychological wound.
It was a moving story, certainly.
But look at the theology within that story. He argues that for that child, Mount Ursius became Mount Sinai. It became At-Tur. Why? Because it served the function of elevating the human spirit. The sanctity wasn't in the geology of the rock. It was in the interaction between the human need and the object.
See, this is where I struggle. If Mamur implies strictly human use or function, does this strip the object of inherent sanctity? The source argues that function determines sanctity, like a brain thinking or a house housing people, but this is a very utilitarian view of the sacred.
It's a human-centric view. The text was revealed for humans, wasn't it?
But is religion supposed to be purely human-centric? If the Kaaba is empty, is it just a pile of stones? The traditional view holds that certain places have an ontological holiness, a sacredness that exists whether a human is standing there or not. The source seems to be pushing a form of religious utilitarianism. If it doesn't serve a human need or synaptic connection, it's a ruin. That risks reducing the divine mystery to a mere service provider for human emotional stability.
I think you're clinging to mystification because it feels safer. The source is saying that without the witness, the human consciousness, the universe is just dead matter. We give it meaning.
That sounds suspiciously like existentialism dressed up as theology.
Well, maybe existentialism got something right. But if you want to talk about mystification, we have to talk about the jinn. This is where the source really takes the gloves off.
Oh, I expected this to be the friction point. The source is absolutely merciless against superstition.
As it should be. It starts with the Yanmaz Kefin, the fireproof shroud scam. I mean, we have people in the 21st century buying shrouds guaranteed to protect them from hellfire. Why? Because they've stopped using their brains. They've abandoned reason for mystery.
Okay, we can both agree that swindlers selling fireproof shrouds are a blight. That's low-hanging fruit.
But the source goes deeper. It tackles the concept of jinn. Traditionally, these are supernatural beings created from smokeless fire, invisible entities. The source argues that jinn in the text simply means strangers or foreigners, people unknown to the locals.
He cites the prophet's instruction to scouts, correct?
Yes. The scouts were told that if asked who they were, they should say they are from the jinn. Now, did the prophet mean tell them we are demons? No. He meant tell them we are strangers or wanderers so you don't get captured or trigger a tribal vendetta.
The source argues that later generations, having lost the context, turned this linguistic term for stranger into a supernatural monster.
And that is a massive leap.
Is it? Or is it Occam's razor? The source redefines Majnun, a madman, not as someone possessed by a demon, but as someone influenced by foreigners or simply mentally ill. This demystification is crucial. It argues that literal belief in supernatural three-letter beings makes people stupid and fearful. It creates a population scared of the dark rather than curious about the light.
I see the logic. I do. But I am not convinced by the conclusion. It feels like a comprehensive rewriting of the text to fit a materialist worldview. The Quran speaks of jinn listening to the Quran, of jinn being created before humans. By redefining jinn purely as foreigners, the source is essentially excising the metaphysical layer of the text.
Or maybe the metaphysical layer was an invention of medieval folklore.
Described in tradition. My concern is this. Is the source guilty of the very thing it critiques? It accuses literalists of making things up, but is the source not creating a new script that fits a modern scientific rationalist bias? It feels like the source is embarrassed by the supernatural elements of the faith and is working overtime to rationalize them into something acceptable to a modern skeptical intellect.
I don't think it's embarrassment. I think it's a refusal to let superstition kill. And I mean kill literally. This connects to our final point, the persecution of thinkers. The source draws a straight line from literalism and anti-intellectualism to murder.
The examples provided were certainly tragic. The story of Socrates.
It's heartbreaking. The source asks, who killed Socrates? It wasn't just the state, it was Meletus, a troll poet. The source frames the poets of that era as the trolls of the ancient world, hired guns for kings who used flowery language to destroy reputations.
It's an interesting parallel to modern media manipulation, I admit. The idea that a poet can be a propagandist is historically sound.
And then the modern example, this one, it hit me hard. The Dr. Faratin Julie Bator, also known as the famous actor Junait Arkin. The source recounts him going to a village where a woman was dying in childbirth. He wanted to intervene, to give a simple injection that could save her, but the husband and father pulled guns on him.
Because of tradition.
Because he was a male doctor, and it was dishonorable for him to touch her naked skin. They stood there with guns while she bled out.
And the result?
She died. The baby died. The source argues this is the result of tradition without reason. Literalism leads to murder. When you value the symbol of honor over the substance of life, you get dead bodies. That is the cost of not using your brain.
That is a powerful and undeniable tragedy. However, I do want to nuance the view on poetry and tradition presented here. The source condemns poets as trolls and soothsayers who served corrupt kings, blaming them for the death of Socrates. Yet, in the very same breath, the source acknowledges that the prophet honored the poet Ka'b bin Zuhair by giving him his own cloak, the burda.
Because Ka'b used his poetry for truth.
Exactly. So the distinction isn't between reason and tradition or philosophy and poetry. It's between ethical and unethical behavior. The source seems to have a contradiction here. It vilifies the poets when discussing Socrates to make a point about the persecution of thinkers, but then has to carve out an exception for the prophet's poet.
I see why you think that, but I would argue the source is distinguishing between the system of manipulation and the individual who breaks it. The source mentions that Ka'b bin Zuhair's cloak was eventually bought by Muawiyah, who used it as a prop for legitimacy, essentially returning to the troll mentality. The critique stands. When you value the symbol, the cloak, the tradition, over the substance, the truth, the life of a woman in childbirth, you end up with a dead culture.
That is a fair distinction, but it brings us back to the central tension of this entire debate. The source wants to strip away the symbol to get to the substance. But for many, the symbol is the vessel of the substance. When you turn Mount Sinai into just a mountain, and jinn into just foreigners, you might be saving the intellect, but are you starving the soul?
The source would argue that the soul is starved by lies, not by reality. The soul is fed by witnessing the inscribed book of the universe, by understanding genetics. The source mentions mitochondrial DNA, the signature of mothers going back billions of years. He calls that the true book. That realization that we are connected by a biological chain of mothers back to the beginning is far more spiritual than believing in a magic fireproof shroud.
And yet, there is a certain coldness to a purely rational faith. As we wrap up this analysis, I find myself respecting the source's call to use the brain. The rejection of rote memorization is essential, but I remain cautious. This aggressive reinterpretation, turning supernatural elements into purely rational or metaphorical symbols, might leave us with a philosophy that is intellectually satisfying but spiritually barren. It risks turning the text into a mirror that reflects only our modern scientific face, rather than a window into the divine mystery.
I disagree. I think the source provides a necessary antidote to a stagnant, superstitious faith. By viewing the universe, stars, mountains, biology, as the inscribed book and demanding that humans function as witnesses rather than blind followers, the source restores the dignity of the human intellect. It challenges us to stop looking for miracles in magic tricks and start seeing the miracle in the very fabric of reality.
It certainly challenges the listener. It demands that you look at a mountain or a book not just as objects, but as witnesses to truth.
It leaves us with the question, are we possessors of the world, trying to own and control it like the pharaoh with his papyrus? Or are we witnesses to it, unrolling the parchment of the universe to read what is written?
That is the question. And on that note, we will leave you to decide how you read the book of your own life.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.
Until next time.